how we need to work together, then we want to be able to go very far. We need each of you to determine the food system you want for your future and to act on it to make them a reality. We must do this understanding fully well our place in the world and that what we do as individuals impacts on others. I look forward to working with you in this summit process. Together, we can build a world of inclusive growth, environmental sustainability, and social justice. We can build a resilient world where no one is hungry, no one is poor, and no one is left behind. I thank you.
And hello, I'm Anya Lawler and I'm your moderator for this afternoon's dialogue. It's the second in a series of 4 national dialogues that are going to feed into that United Nations Food Systems Summit in the autumn. Now, last week we discussed Ireland's agri-food strategy, and today our theme is the health and well-being of people in society. And we have another great lineup of speakers for you today. But the point to emphasise before we get going is that we want to hear from you. I'll be telling you how you can take part in just a moment, so please send us your comments and your questions and reactions to our very brilliant keynote speaker, Dr David Nabarro. And you can join in our 2 panel discussions on how to make food and health central to the agri-food strategy. That's with Professor Alice Stanton, Musgrave's Chief Commercial Officer Sharon Buckley, Dr Donal O'Shea and Chef JP McMahon. And for our second panel on how to build social sustainability into our food systems, how to mind the people and the communities that are central to all of this, we'll be joined by Cathal O'Donoghue from NUI Galway, trawler woman and restaurateur Kathleen A, Iseult Ward from Food Cloud, and Brendan Dunford, who co-founded the Burren Bio Trust. And in a moment, I'll introduce you to our chair for today's dialogue, Dr Pamela Byrne, who's the Chief Executive of the Food Safety Authority. Now, we're using Slido today, so please join in the conversation online. Simply take out your smartphone and open your browser, and then you go to slido.com. Most of you will have done this before. The event code is #FoodSystems, all one word, capital F, capital S, #FoodSystems. And you can now ask questions and vote for the ones you like in the poll questions we're putting to you. So we're starting with a quick poll. And this is going to feed in, the polls are going to feed into the different conversations. So this question is going to be the first that feeds into the conversation we have on panel 1. So what is the most important consideration for you when you're purchasing food ingredients? Is it the price? Is it the amount of packaging? Is it the carbon footprint? Is it quality assurance? Whether it's organic, nutritional value? And so we'll be really interested, and I'm sure the panel will, to know what you think of all of that. What matters most to you? For more information on Ireland's food system and the UN Food Systems Summit this year, visit gov.ie/food systems. Once again, all one word, all lowercase. gov.ie/food systems, and there you can also register for the upcoming dialogues. I'll tell you a little more about those later. The public consultation on the environmental assessment of the draft Agri-Food Strategy 2030, that's now open until the 15th of June. And again, to have your say, go to gov.ie/consultations. So we hope you'll take part in all of those and in this session with us for the next 2 hours. We want to hear from you as much as possible. It's certainly going to be a busy 2 hours. To kick it all off, here's our chairperson for this afternoon's dialogue, the Chief Executive of the Food Safety Authority, Dr Pamela Byrne.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the second National Dialogue of Ireland's Food System as part of Ireland's engagement with the UN Food Systems Summit in September of this year. My name is Pamela Byrne and I'm the CEO of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. I have the privilege of chairing today's dialogue, which will explore health and well-being within a sustainable food system. Healthy people with access to safe and nutritious food, along with the ability to make informed choices about the food they eat, are the foundation of a healthy society and a fully functioning economy. Consumers of food in Ireland and of Irish food in 180 markets across the world have higher expectations than ever. They expect that their food is safe and that the information on the label is true. They expect the information they get on allergens on restaurant menus or on takeaway delivery menus is accurate. They expect that the food they purchase in supermarkets has been manufactured in accordance with the highest standards of food safety and can be trusted. They expect that the Food Safety Authority of Ireland is doing its job and ensuring the safety, integrity and authenticity of the food chain, along with other agencies and government departments, as well as working with our regulatory partners internationally. Ireland enjoys a strong reputation for food safety globally, and this is an essential prerequisite for trade, but is most critical in the protection of public health. Food business operators are aware that they have primary responsibility for the safety and authenticity of the food they produce, and that compliance with standards is verified by a robust and transparent food safety control system. Consumers also have a role to play in storing and preparing food safely, and they can also play an important role in protecting their own health by consuming a healthy diet. Over the last number of years, revised dietary guidelines underpinned by science for 1 to 5-year-olds, teenagers, younger and older adults have been published in Ireland, and these can help people make the healthy choice the easy choice. But food is not food if it is not safe. Food is not nutritious if it does not provide essential nutrients to sustain life. I would therefore contend that Ireland, with its grass-based production systems, its extensive marine and freshwater resources, and its commitment to ongoing investment in science and innovation, should be well positioned to be a leader internationally in sustainable food systems as set out in the Draft Agri-Food Strategy 2030 launched last week. But there is lots of work to be done, many issues to be teased out, and conversations like the one we'll hear today will be key in moving us in that direction. These national dialogues provide a fantastic opportunity to hear from a broad range of stakeholders, both on Ireland's own food system and with our engagement with the global food system. Today's dialogue will start with a keynote address from Dr David Nabarro, who will be followed by 2 panel discussions moderated by Anya, as you've already heard. The first panel will examine how the issue of food and health should be brought to a new level of political and policy importance, as outlined in the Draft Agri-Food Strategy, currently under public consultation and further necessitated by the onset of COVID-19. The panel will discuss the respective roles of government, citizens, consumers and businesses to assist sustainability practices and improve diets within the Irish population. The second panel will examine the importance of achieving social sustainability as part of a sustainable food systems approach and the investments in human capital that this requires. It will draw on the valuable experience of rural areas, coastal communities and public-private collaboration. The panel will discuss how local leadership, innovation and technology can combine to increase income and employment opportunities in our communities, whilst enhancing well-being and health. Please join the conversation by using the hashtag food systems. So let's get started. Please let me introduce our keynote speaker. Dr David Nabarro is the co-director of the Imperial College Institute of Global Health Innovation at Imperial College London and supports systems leadership for sustainable development through his Switzerland-based social enterprise 4SD. Since March 2020, David is appointed Special Envoy of WHO Director General on COVID-19. He is also Senior Advisor to the Food Systems Summit Dialogues. David secured his medical qualification in 1974 and has worked in over 50 countries in communities and hospitals, governments, civil society, universities and in the United Nations programmes. Dr Nabarro will discuss how the sustainability of our global food system can help address many of today's key challenges, most notably malnutrition and the inequalities that have been exposed and deepened as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you now, Dr Nabarro.
Good day, my name is David Nabarro. I'm delighted to be with you all today. I serve as Senior Advisor for the Food Systems Summit Dialogues, and I'm really grateful to Sinead McPhillips, the National Food Systems Dialogue Convener for Ireland, for inviting me to address you today. I'd like to cover, first of all, the Food Systems Summit itself. Secondly, the role of the Food Systems Summit Dialogues as part of the engagement and preparation process. And thirdly, some reflections on today's topic, links between food and health. First, on the Food Systems Summit. This is a summit that's convened by the United Nations Secretary General. He's doing it because he wants to raise the level of ambition about efforts to make food systems more sustainable as part of the overall journey towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030. This is really important because, as we know from numerous studies, although food systems around the world have greatly increased the amounts of food that are available and also the variety of food that is available for people everywhere, there is still a number of challenges that have got to be resolved. Food systems are not always contributing to people's health and nutrition. Food systems in some cases are interacting with the environment in an unhelpful way. And then there's also the challenge that many of those who are involved in producing and processing food are unable to earn a decent standard of living. That's why the UN Secretary General has taken it upon himself to organise this summit in order to raise ambition. He wants a systems approach to food, he wants an all SDGs approach to food, and he would like a summit that involves people everywhere and focuses on solutions. The dialogues are a core component of the Food Systems Summit. They complement a series of technical groups that have been set up by the Special Envoy of the Summit, Dr Agnes Kalibata, because those are the action tracks and they're coming out with propositions on what needs to change for food systems to get to where we want them to be. And then through the dialogues, the voices of national governments and also for other stakeholders in countries are able to come through and to be part of the preparation process. The 5 objectives of the summit and the 5 action tracks focus on, firstly, improving access to nutritious food, secondly, shifting diets so they're more sustainable and nutritious for everybody, thirdly, making sure that food production is nature positive and good for the environment, fourthly, trying to attend to the issues of livelihoods of particularly smallholders throughout the world, and fifth, seeking food systems that are resilient in the face of numerous stresses, including climate, including disease like COVID, and including conflict. The dialogues are an opportunity for multiple stakeholders to come together with a safe space that encourages open exchanges on difficult issues. They acknowledge that there will not always be agreement on the ways to move ahead with food systems, and the dialogues, by being a place where everybody can be engaged and where specific issues can be looked at in detail through careful facilitation and curation, the dialogues present an opportunity for multi-stakeholder engagement. And so all over the world now, we have countries like Ireland initiating their own food system summit dialogues. They're proving to be remarkably interesting in all sorts of different venues, because by coming together, particularly with different parts of government working on food as a shared issue, the full range of challenges in food systems are beginning to become apparent. And then by involving other stakeholders like farmers, like businesses, like civil society, like youth, like women, and of course, all involved in the actual private sector part of food systems, there is a real chance of getting a much more rounded approach to identifying food systems of the future. And the national dialogue conveners who are organising their dialogues are invited to focus the dialogues on emerging with a pathway to sustainable, equitable and resilient food systems of the future. And as well as having a pathway, we invite the dialogues to focus on the key decisions that need to be worked through for there to be success with coming together around food systems. And that key decision work is really focused on things that need to shift now for food systems to get to where that we want them to be. And then having looked at the decisions, then there's the possibility, and I say only a possibility, of the emergence at national level of coalitions of stakeholders who want to work together on the issues of food, and also the possibility that commitments will emerge at the national level that could perhaps be aggregated with commitments from other countries in the region through regional dialogues, and then be taken to the summit to be again linked to global coalitions and commitments that are being made around the propositions coming from the action tracks. But with 103 countries already nominating conveners, and with many more conveners due to come on board in the near future, this is clearly an enormous exercise, and there's an awful lot going on. Now, when it comes to Ireland, I want to start by recognising the extraordinary leadership by the Government of Ireland in relation to the Food Systems Summit. But I'd also like to applaud Ireland's global contribution to efforts to tackle hunger and malnutrition everywhere. I'd like to particularly greet my friend Tom Arnold, who's been appointed as Ireland's Special Envoy on Food Systems, but who has a long history, starting when I first met Tom with the Hunger Task Force in 2010, and moving on through all the work that's been done more recently on the Ireland National Food Systems Strategy, as well as Ireland's work with the European Union on food systems, particularly in Africa. I'd like to recognise Ireland's commitment to organising a suite of national dialogues around food systems, and Ireland is going to be in a fortunate position to build its national pathway to the food systems of the future as a result of the work that's already been undertaken in the country. I hope that the dialogues will support the wider examination, exploration and socialisation of Ireland's food and agriculture strategy, as well as mobilisation of all stakeholders to ensure that there is scope for comprehensive multi-stakeholder implementation of the strategy, a process that will be reviewed at intervals and in the years to come that will be adapted in the light of emerging conditions and context. In addition to national dialogues, there's also the option for anybody, anywhere, to organise their own dialogues independently. They're locally driven and they're adaptable to contexts. Because they can be organised by anybody, they offer the opportunity for those whose actions may not necessarily align with those of their national governments to get into the process and to start doing their work. So what we're finding all over the world is that member state dialogue conveners are welcoming independent dialogues undertaken within their jurisdictions, and they're trying to link up with them. So of the many independent dialogues that have already been announced, there's a number that are being linked to national dialogues, and I'm also very pleased to see that several of them are taking place in Ireland. All the dialogue work is available on a website called www.summitdialogues.org. We hope that all of you will have a chance to look at that website. We try very hard to keep it up to date with the details of conveners and so on, but sometimes there are delays because we have to check with those who have been identified as conveners exactly how they would like to be nominated on the website and the degree to which they want to be contactable by others. The topic of your dialogue is food and health. These are two fields on which I spend most of my time working. Some of you may associate me with my role as Special Envoy for the WHO Director General on COVID-19, and I'd like to take a moment to address the linkages between food and health through the lens of COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic is revealing some of the major challenges that are faced in all societies when it comes to responding to the needs of those who are most disadvantaged. You see that particularly in relation to food systems. Poor people, when they are asked to, for example, stop moving around because of COVID, can't easily access the cash they need to buy food. And there's a real risk that as a result of movement restrictions due to COVID, there will be an increase in hunger associated with poverty and an increase in malnutrition, particularly among children, because for so many children, school feeding is an essential part of their nutrition. Yet with COVID, a lot of schools are being closed, and those nutritious meals on which children depend just are not being offered. So we're going to see an increase in malnutrition associated with COVID. And so I'd like to suggest a number of other issues related to COVID that are cropping up. First, countries that are enormously dependent on food imports are extremely nervous that a shock like COVID disturbs those imports, and we've heard from a number of countries that this is a real issue, and I think it'll come up in the dialogues. Secondly, I want to be clear that farmers have found COVID difficult because in many cases they're not able to get food to market, and we've had many instances of perishable foods like vegetables being ploughed back into the land or dairy products having to be thrown away. A number of countries that trade in food have got worried that COVID-19 and similar concerns might lead to some sort of impediment to trade. Perhaps exports are prevented. So I want to stress that actually what we're seeing is COVID affecting many different aspects of food. Even though the COVID-19 pandemic has made the organisation of dialogues challenging, I want to say how pleased I am with the ingenuity being used by conveners everywhere to tackle the challenge. And the virus, we must remember, is the problem. People are the solution, and anything we can do to make it possible for people to come together in order to be able to deal with the COVID crisis and to be stronger in the face of food insecurity, whilst at the same time working for more sustainable, resilient, and indeed equitable food systems is so desirable. We'll all be discussing this at the pre-summit that's taking place in July, and I'm sure that the work you're all doing will be hugely relevant for that. But it's in the actual summit itself in September, when Prime Ministers and Presidents will come together, that I look forward to Ireland really standing up strongly and being able to show that a multi-stakeholder approach to the future of food systems is the way to go. So best of luck for today. I look forward very much to hearing the outcomes. Thank you for the chance to be with you.
Dr David Nabarro, just giving an idea of the scale of the operation we are all involved in. Today's second dialogue, or part of that. And let me introduce our first panel to you now. And remember to send in your comments and questions so that you are part of this conversation. With me here in our studio is Professor Alice Stanton. She's Professor in Cardiovascular Pharmacology at the Royal College of Surgeons, and she's a member of Ireland's 2030 Agri-Food Strategy Committee. Sharon Buckley is the Chief Commercial Officer with Musgraves, which has been keeping shops stocked and people fed for many years. And Sharon is also responsible for Musgraves' sustainability agenda. Professor Donal O'Shea is known to many of you. He's the HSE National Lead on Obesity, and he's done extensive work on the prevention of obesity. And JP McMahon is, as my aunties used to say, a legend in his own lifetime. He's a renowned chef, restaurateur and author, and the founder of the Food on the Edge and the Galway Food Festivals, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. Are we going to have a look at the result of that first Slido poll? Do we have that result in yet? Or will, yes, there we go. So the question I asked you before we started, and I just thought we'd give this, your poll results, to the panel to kick off with. What's the most important consideration for you watching us and joining us today when you're buying food? And on 3% it was the carbon footprint. On 5% it was the amount of packaging. Interesting, because we hear an awful lot about that these days. On 5% as well, whether it's organic, so again quite a small number there. Price matters most to 12%. Taste matters most to 25%. But really interesting here, and Professor Alice Stanton, maybe you'd respond to this, the fact that nutritional value is the most important consideration for 30% of the people with us today when they're buying food. What does that tell you as we talk about the change we're trying to bring about in the food industry?
I think it's very encouraging that nutritional value is regarded as so important. I'm a little bit disappointed that the carbon footprint is so low. Quality assurance and safety of food is up pretty high, and taste is high. I think we need to bear all of those factors in mind. I don't think we're communicating well enough currently about nutritional value. I think a lot of people are familiar with the traffic light system, which really highlights the disadvantaged disadvantageous ingredients of our food. So the salt, the sugar, the excess of calories, the saturated fat, in fact, that probably should be added trans fats rather than saturated fats. We're actually learning...
Yes, again, because there's different breakdowns within that.
We're learning more and more about that. However, the really important thing is that we are not highlighting the beneficial ingredients. So the vitamins and minerals, the essential amino acids, the essential omega-3 fatty acids that are present in natural whole food. So natural whole fruits and whole vegetables and whole animal source foods. So the meat, dairy, eggs and oily fish that we need to be eating in moderation, in the correct proportions. And we really aren't getting that across on the front of pack labels. But I am encouraged that people are valuing nutritional value and nutritional content. I think we need to improve on that.
Okay. But Donal O'Shea, the thing I often wonder is in many ways it's not for want of trying. I mean, if you look at the primary school programme and the messaging that goes to children there, and there's a huge amount of work that goes on. And then the experience of many people is, busy lifestyles. You get, half your kids go vegan and they won't eat anything if it doesn't come in a bought-in salad from the shop because they won't eat home cooking anymore. The fellows all want, do you know what I mean, everything with chilli sauce all over it. And so people fall into these habits. They feel that, but they have all been taught, an awful lot of the right messages early on. So from your point of view, in selling this message, what are we getting wrong? What do you think, following on from Alice Stanton, is going wrong at the moment? And how do we help people change? Because the whole idea of this is less talk and more real change.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do need, we need real change. We have reached a point where what we are eating and the pattern of our food consumption and drink consumption is the biggest driver of disease that we have, and that's an extraordinary point to have reached. Education is the key. I think the answer to that first question around nutritional value speaks to the audience that would join a food systems summit, and I think when you look at multi-stakeholder engagement, we absolutely have to reach to where the problem is at its greatest, and that's in the less well-off parts of our society. And I think food labeling is important, but I think the key is going to be around the marketing and promotion of the high-fat, high-salt, high-sugar foods in a very targeted way to those who are most likely to struggle with their weight. And I think that is the key. And when we have had an overweight model of care approved in this country recently, so we're going to start actively treating overweight and obesity in Ireland in the next number of years. And that's going to end up being like, what happened when we started to treat lung cancer and heart disease. The role of cigarettes in driving those was actively targeted. And we have to do the same with our approach to managing overweight and obesity and really energize if you like, the battle against the promotion and marketing of high-fat, high-salt, high-sugar foods to those most at risk.
That's a stunning statement about our food, our diets, driving the diseases that we suffer from. And actually, I've got another Slido poll question I want people to join in on now, and it speaks to this. To what extent should public policy dictate people's diet? Should it be 100%, 75%, 50%, 25%, or 0%? Should the state butt out and let people eat what they want willy-nilly? And in terms of that first poll result, Sharon, I want to come to you in Musgraves, because one of the questions that has come in from Chris is, with food retailers being in many senses winning winners during the pandemic. We all came to realise how much we need our local supermarket and our local shops. Shouldn't they take the lead and offer more incentives for shoppers to buy organic and sustainable food, which was only 5% in our poll there? What do you think?
Well, I think we've seen a big change in, I suppose, people's approach to health over the last number of years. We're certainly seeing consumers become much more interested in healthy foods and healthy diets. And actually through COVID itself, we've seen some quite dramatic shifts as well. So a number of years ago, it was probably about superfoods and the health food aisle, and less about a kind of holistic approach to healthy food and diets. And we certainly see that change, as I say, during COVID. Our most recent consumer research shows that consumers have really valued, I suppose, getting back to basics over the last 15 months. Things like cooking from scratch, buying local produce, really getting back to kind of basic diets as well in terms of fruit and veg and meat and I suppose components of diet that Alice spoke to at the beginning. And I think we have a role certainly as retailers in encouraging that and in making kind of fresh, natural foods really available to consumers, driving things like local foods harder and promoting them in terms of promotions, price, accessibility, and also areas like convenience. So you spoke, Anya, about lifestyles and busy people, etc. And I think, as I say, people have gone back to basics and really valued the role of food in healthy diets and in their overall well-being. But they also, I suppose, are kind of sick of cooking from scratch. So we're seeing more recently, people looking for convenient foods. And I think our job as retailers is to make the healthier choices the more accessible and convenient choice. So, for example, in SuperValue, we would have introduced programs like Prepared by a Butcher or Prepared by a Fishmonger, which is making basic healthy foods just much more convenient. So it's, meat and 2 veg in a tray that you put in the oven, or it's fish in a bag with sauce that you can microwave. So it's taking some of those challenges around things like cooking, things like budgeting as well. So you can maybe buy 2 dinners for €10 and making it, as I say, easy and accessible for people to have basic, wholesome, nutritious food every day. I think organic is an interesting factor, but it still represents, the minority of sales in Ireland. I think people have trust in mainstream fruit and veg and mainstream meat, etc. in this country where the quality and the standards of production are really high. So while organic food is important, I think it's more about mass market, mainstream, wholesome, natural foods, and as I say, with a particular emphasis on local.
JP McMahon, we heard David Nabarro talking there about COVID and its impact on food worldwide. It's been a dreadful year, an annus horribilis for many people involved in the food industry in Ireland at the hospitality end. You'd be aware of that. Again, what Sharon was talking about, we all went home, we made our banana bread, our sourdough, we had time to cook from scratch. Now people trying to pick up the threads again. So what are your thoughts about this past year? What lessons should we take forward in trying to, if you like, build back better in our agri-food industry, particularly from your point of view?
I think the first 2 points. One would be, I think community is a very important part of what we do, and working with a local community of whether it's suppliers or farmers, and trying to build, I suppose, a real food system, one that is dependent on people, where you meet people through the food system, as opposed to you're just dealing with food products and as a commodity. I think the other one, and Donald mentioned this, is education. I think education is really key. I think there's a lack of transparency in our food systems. I mean, really, I think, and this is probably something both for the panel and for the whole summit, is that, sustainable is not a word that is defined equally, and I would question its use in many practices, even in the case of restaurants. I also think, with regards to nutrition versus organic, and that I think many of the things that we stigmatize in relation to obesity, whether it's fat, salt, and sugar, are the building blocks of food and of life itself. So I think, as a chef, I think we need to be very careful about how we communicate this, because I am for teaching people how to cook. I have 110 kids in a cooking class, a Zoom cooking class at the moment. And it's about respecting ingredients, knowing where they come from, knowing the value of those ingredients, knowing what produces taste and what doesn't produce taste. But I'd never reduce food to just its nutritional value. And I think you mentioned the European traffic light system, or Anya did. I think there's a lot of problems with that, because it values some processed foods over some whole foods because of their salt, fat, or sugar intake. Take, for example, like Serrano ham or prosciutto that might have a higher salt content. So I'd be concerned about them. I hope going forward that people return to restaurants, but retain the values that they learned over the last year, and many values I learned myself. I mean, I don't cook at home an awful lot because I'm cooking in the restaurant 5 days a week. So it was enlightening for me to cook a lot more at home and cook domestically. And I think that domestic space is very, very important for us Irish people, because we still have a very good connection with the land, and we can't overlook that fact, because many countries, whether it's the US or whether it's some of the bigger cities in England, they have lost that connection to the land and knowing where food comes from.
And I think, actually, Sharon, maybe you take this point. Isn't it important? Because, again, this is an argument, you know, whatever about organic versus non-organic. That point that JP was making about community. So it's about what's local. And, you know, in a pandemic, what's local became very important to all of us. We all became very aware between COVID and Brexit of supply lines and how they can be stretched. So again, if we're trying to educate people, if we're trying to, you know, focus on nutrition and health, doesn't that mean emphasising what's local, what's got a low carbon footprint in getting to you, and what, because it's freshest, is likely to have a much higher nutritional value than something that's been flown from the other side of the world? So how do we change that messaging?
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, as I say, people really did come to value local food over the last year, and I think recognise, as you say, what is actually truly local as well. And people had different maybe perceptions of where a product came from, but have become more knowledgeable and more interested and you know, deliberately informing themselves better on local food over that period. It is interesting in research, as I say as well, consumers do see local food as being more nutritious, and that whole, I suppose, wanting to support local communities, not just in terms of economic vibrancy of local communities and local producers, but also the whole sustainability agenda is really coming to the fore, as everyone is speaking about. And while the sustainability agenda is very broad, and obviously packaging, and it didn't come out in the poll, but packaging is certainly up in lights with consumers, a lot of it is about the holistic sustainability agenda, low food miles, low carbon footprint, and then connecting that with the kind of economic and social viability of communities, particularly in rural Ireland. So I think that is the emphasis that we should take going forward. It is something that consumers want, as I say, on a multitude of, or based on a multitude of factors, and certainly there's an opportunity to further grow that over the years to come. I think one of the things that we have done over the last number of years in SuperValue is a programme called Food Academy, which is about nurturing small local suppliers and helping them to grow and expand. And the Happy Pear, for example, who you would know is very successful, started on that programme with us. So it has the capacity to, you know, really grow suppliers if their product resonates with consumers, and they have that ambition. And I think programs like that, and other retailers running them as well, I think can really help the vibrancy of the whole small and local production sector into the future. And certainly as retailers, we certainly we kind of accept our responsibility and an opportunity here in terms of really giving consumers what they want.
Donal, a question has come in. Does there need to be an increased focus on nutrition as part of medical training? So do the doctors need to learn more about this? And should GPs be more central to tackling issues around weight? And it's, you know, there are a lot of sensitivities around this now, you know, in terms of, you know, you don't want to be giving kids, you know, making them prone to an eating disorder or making them feel stigmatized. So how do we have these discussions? How do we educate people?
Well, I think you educate people, or you have the discussion by making it routine to record an individual's weight and height, and the new GP contract in Ireland incorporates health checks at the age of 2 and 5, and as it's expanded, will go into kind of adolescence, where weight and height will be recorded. And you know, with any disease, it's about early identification, and then do something, because by the time a child has significant, you know, appears to have a weight problem, that weight problem is extreme and it's difficult to do something about. So unless you're weighing and measuring routinely and then able to have the discussion in a non-stigmatized manner with the parents to point out that, look, the child's weight growth is ahead of their height growth. So if you can keep the weight steady, a child will grow into their weight, if you like, in a healthier, in a healthy way. You obviously don't have that chance as an adult, but in adults, there is going to be routine weighing and measuring of height and weight when you go for a GP checkup as part of the new contract. And there is a plan to recruit over 100 dietitians now to deliver a combination of diabetes prevention and weight management programs in the community. So GPs will now have somewhere to signpost an individual for, if you like, more active and appropriate management of their weight. And the majority of patients still coming to our clinic in Loughlinstown, which is still kind of the main clinic for people with severe and complex obesity, have never seen a dietitian. They've never actually, they're coming to us, and you know, that's the first thing we're doing, is arranging a review of their approach to nutrition. What we understand now, though, is that treatment is different to prevention. So when you have the disease of obesity, eat less, move more is not the treatment. You know, we do not tell somebody with skin cancer, melanoma, because they have a genetic predisposition and they got too much sun exposure. We don't tell them to put on sun cream and wear a hat, whereas that's prevention. We are still telling people with obesity to eat less and move more. And that is not the treatment for obesity. You have to have drug therapy and you have to have surgery if necessary. And that attitude is changing slowly within the medical profession, and the realization is dawning. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic, as Dr. Nabarro alluded to when he said climate, conflict, and COVID as the three kind of triple C's, COVID-19 and obesity has collided, and it's been called a syndemic, because you have absolutely really poor outcomes in people living with obesity who contracted COVID. So everyone is sitting up and saying, look, obesity is a chronic disease, we must treat it, and therefore we have to incorporate more aggressive education into our undergraduate curriculum across medicine, nursing, physio, and then we've got to get everyone detecting early so we can intervene.
And JP, you mentioned, and one of the things that many chefs like yourself did as part of the lockdown pivot was to move online. And you know, the popularity of all those, for instance, the kids' classes. So in terms of educating children, because on one level, you know, we watch television, food television, more than we ever did in all our lives before. You know, food is talked about. There's almost an element of food pornography sometimes, you might say. And yet, on the other hand, there are these huge gaps that we've been hearing about from the other panellists in terms of nutrition and also in terms of equality. So what are you trying to teach about food to a new generation?
Yeah, I think more than ever before, there are more cookbooks produced and more TV programs about food produced, and yet people are eating worse and cooking less. And I suppose what I try and do is to try and teach people the basic value of food. And what I mean by that is the basic building blocks of making a dish, whether it's something simple as like bolognese or cauliflower and cheese or lasagna or all these things. Like nutritious dishes that you can communicate where a certain product comes from, where a certain food comes from, tie it into culture, So for me, I'm always trying to make food a cultural experience. And I think that's something that we miss. I think it's something that we really miss in Ireland. Possibly Italians or Spanish or French understand a bit more. But food as a cultural experience is really important for me. And that's why I value the nutritional aspect of it, and I value other aspects of it. But I think we need to talk about it and enjoy it as much as we enjoy the theatre or anything else that we do really well, like sports in this country. But I was amazed, really. We've done classes for adults as well, but the kids ones were the most oversubscribed ones. So I think there is a hunger there for education, and I would love to see. And I and many others, such as Doreen Allen, have talked about this for many years, like a kids' food subject. And I'm not talking about a cooking subject in primary school. I'm talking about a food subject that we would study food in the way we study math or English, because we eat 3 times a day, and we kind of pawn it off to the parents most of the time to will the children eat well, but we don't expect the parents to teach our children math or many other things. So I hope in the future there is some subject that will take in all of these different avenues of food, such as nutrition and culture and other things. That's what I hope.
That's a great idea, food as a subject in schools. And on that thing about, valuing our own terroir, I always think, if Italians had our new potatoes, there'd be, potato festivals happening all over the country, the way that they celebrate their local produce in Italy. I want to give you a correction to the poll question. The percentages, were they a little bit confusing? So I'll give you the question again, and hopefully this time it will be clearer. So to what extent should public policy shape people's diet? Very much speaking to what we're talking about today. So you could choose that people's diets should be strictly regulated by government. Dietary advice should be given, but more prominently than now. Dietary information should only be there for those who want it, or not at all. In other words, people should be free to eat what they want and do what they want, and it's none of the state businesses. But even in terms of the percentages, 81% saying, this is really interesting, isn't it, Alice? 81% dietary advice should be given, but more prominently than now. So that messaging, like JP was talking about, perhaps we could put food as a as a subject in schools for people to learn about it properly, and also to learn, because as Sharon was saying, the busy lives, people don't always have the time or even the skill set to work from scratch.
I think JP's suggestion of food as a subject would be great in either primary or secondary school or both. And in fact, there was a really interesting project conducted in the primary schools surrounding Derry, where they looked at both education concerning food and the food environment, what you surrounded the children with, what snacks you provided, experience during cooking classes. And in actual fact, for both knowledge and practice of eating sensibly and healthfully, both were important. So both the education, what you say to the kids, but also the actual environment that you surround them with. If you say one thing and then actually the teachers and parents
are outside the door and packets of crisps and the lunch packs.
Yeah. It is not as good. And in actual fact, they also tested mental health and concentration of the children who got both the education and the environment, either or the combination. And the combination was best for mental health and concentration during school. So there are considerable benefits to more education and improving actually the experience of eating for children in particular, but for all of us.
And Donald, do you also endorse that idea of food as a subject, particularly what you're saying about the way that we need to educate not just the medical profession, but we need to change public attitudes, and people will be getting the information when they go to their GPs now about their weight?
Yeah, I think having a population leave school skilled in understanding food and its importance is essential. There is the Department of Education are very committed to that, and it's the how it's done, and it's the how. And I would love to think that would inform the discussion around this strategy and be a kind of an output from the consultation phase of this. How do we do that in Ireland? There's a wellbeing curriculum that's been introduced in secondary schools, 300 to 400 hours in the junior cycle. It's going to extend into the senior cycle, and nutrition coming into that, I think, would be fantastic. Could you, we give points for subjects, but points isn't the answer. No, building food into the curriculum in schools would be essential and could be transformative to our population health.
JP, just one thing before I go back to, if you like, the broader agenda. But I remember growing up, my mother very often couldn't afford to buy meat during the week, but she knew how to buy the scrag ends of the lamb, or she knew how to steep the hearts, and she knew, and I'm not saying we necessarily wanted to eat hearts, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but there was a level of home cooking skill there. And Sharon was making the point about time, that knowledge and that time isn't there to make, if you like, the most economical use of food. So people are, if you like, pushed in the direction of needing, the cheap chicken in the supermarket or whatever, which, we're all trying to move away from. Your thoughts on that, given that we are now in the 21st century and hopefully picking up the threads of our lives in some kind of new post-pandemic normal?
Yeah, I would say to people, and I say this in the cooking classes, it's not a black and white situation in terms of cooking at home. We all live busy lives, and many homes are two parents working. I would always say, well, begin with one day. And if you can cook a meal on Saturday, well, begin with one day and try and get a recipe and buy stuff and engage with your environment, whether it's going to the local butchers or the fishmonger in the supermarket or whatever it is that you're talking to people about food. And then possibly do 2 days. And then most people don't even know that when you cook food, that you can keep it in your fridge for up to 48 hours, most foods, and then eat it over the next 2 days. I mean, that's the question that I get asked a lot, is how long is it going to last for, or does it freeze well? And so there are ways in which we can educate people to cook on a Saturday and actually just put it in their freezer, and then you'll have food for 7 days. And so I think these things are part of an agenda, a holistic agenda that we need. And we also, we need to value food more. And that issue about price, which was high with nutrition, I think that also needs to be combated globally. There's no point in someone producing asparagus that can't even feed themselves, but the asparagus is being shipped off to Europe so we can buy cheap asparagus. Just so we'll have more money. I mean, that's a discrepancy that absolutely needs to be addressed going forward in this century. So I think that really needs to change. And Europe needs to be a guiding light on that, because most of the food that's being produced in the developed world is going to Europe. And you mentioned chicken there as well. I think really people don't understand the value of chicken. And even when we were growing up, chicken wasn't something you could consume every single day, even twice a day, whereas now it's very much standard practice.
Yeah, those are really good points, and Alice, that idea, just start with one day, or how people can use the weekend to provide, for more convenient solutions for healthier dinners during the week. It's campaigns like that that could show people the way. And will you also we've had a question in about institutions, about improving the food in canteens, in institutions, and we've also heard a lot about hospital food as well. So how people at home can make the change, and the changes we need to make institutionally too.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've focused a fair amount on obesity, and it is a huge problem. Like, of the world's population of almost 8 billion, we now have 2 billion who are obese. We also have almost a billion.
A quarter of the world's population is obese.
That is the current position, and it's not just in the high-income countries. It also is impacting on the low, middle and low-income countries in Asia and in Africa. You can have a combination of starvation or undernutrition alongside, in a neighbouring house, obesity. And what's not known is the hidden hunger. We have a further 2 billion who are micronutrient deficient, who are not getting enough iron, enough selenium, enough iodine, enough vitamins. And that's even relevant to COVID-19. I think most of us have heard of the association of vitamin D deficiency in fighting the severity of COVID-19. But there's also evidence actually that multiple micronutrients are really important for the immune function. So coming back to your question, we need to educate people about the beneficial ingredients in a wide range of food. So you won't get those micronutrients in one food group alone. So you need to get it from the fruits, from the vegetables, from the fish, from the dairy. In fact, dairy, if you drink 2 portions of dairy a day at least, you're 20% less likely to die. So it's not just obesity that is causing deaths and illness worldwide. It is a huge problem. But we also have a hidden hunger, both in the affluent and the less affluent. And in fact, it is the least advantaged within our community that are most likely to be eating those empty calories which promote both obesity and micronutrient deficiency. So a wide range of food, and yes, we do not need to be eating either red meat or chicken every day, or even twice a day, as some people are doing. But we do need to eat a wide range, eat some chicken, eat some red meat, definitely be eating more fruit and vegetables.
And obviously people make their own ethical choices in that regard, but Donal O'Shea, I mean, the difficulty here is, you know, the world is a very noisy place. So the messaging isn't just coming from people like yourselves. You know, there are all kinds of choices now about milk. So that instead of drinking the milk we all grew up drinking, you could be drinking oat milk, or you could be drinking coconut milk. And there are ways, and, you know, there are lots of fads. There are lots of, or even choices, you know, made in good ethical conscience and for good ethical reasons. But within that, say for instance, if you're embracing a vegan diet, you will need to be aware of nutrition and look at the way your diet is balanced. So in a noisy world, it can be difficult to communicate, can't it?
I think it's very difficult to communicate in the current environment. You know, fundamentally, and JP kind of referenced this, fat, sugar and salt are building blocks which are critical to survival, storing energy and taking energy in was the very primal, if you like, thing that allows the individual single cell organism to survive to the next day, and evolution begins. So we need to respect our kind of the building blocks of food, and educate people that there is no such thing as a bad food. It's about proportion and portion. And in a noisy world where profit speaks louder than health, it is, you know, the education piece is the key. And just to reference, if I could, back to the question about institutions, they are, if you like, environments where you can look at a microcosm of change. So the food environment within the prison setting, for example, is incredibly unhealthy. Unhealthier for prison officers than prisoners. Now, that's crazy. You know, if you have proper procurement and if you have proper nutrition guidelines, then you should be able to regulate that environment and look at the impact on health in that microcosm of an institutional setting. And we need to do that. And countries that are small like Ireland can do that. and show the rest of the world that actually if you introduce nutrition guidelines and procurement, a healthy procurement process, that you can change environment and influence health.
So besides the education that needs to be going on and the public messaging and things like, bringing food in much more in an integrated way as part of the school curriculum, Sharon also talked to me about how we drive the change we need by retailers working with producers, particularly in terms of what you were saying about shopping local.
I think there's a lot that retailers can do on the broad sustainability agenda, of which shopping local and buying local products is a key component. But I think, and I was a member, or I am a member of the Agri-Food 2030 Strategy Committee as well, and obviously sustainability is at the core of that, but it is, again, sustainability on a really holistic basis. So I think as retailers, who interface with consumers on a daily basis, we probably understand very well what consumers want, where they're going to go next, and actually sharing that insight right through the supply chain back to the primary producers so that they can focus their efforts on the right areas in terms of what consumers want, and also back the other way. So I think it's really important that retailers use their influence throughout the whole food supply chain to make food sustainable at all the steps along the way. So I think primary producers clearly have a big responsibility, but as we take food from the farm right through to the shelf, it is about making sure it's packaged appropriately, it's transported in the lowest, most efficient, lowest carbon, most efficient way, it's presented in stores, again, that operate sustainably, and we help consumers reduce food waste in the home and live as sustainably as possible as well. And I think retailers have a responsibility and I suppose an opportunity in that space to actually influence the whole food supply chain in the way maybe that others don't.
And Alice, that's where, you think of things we're missing, like the ploughing, Bloom, the food festivals that take place all over the country. JP will know all about it. They're having to move online. But the more we can tell people the story of food, that's another way, and we have to keep finding ways to tell the story of the food that is made here, what its value, and make, if you like, that nutrition message an easy one to absorb.
Yeah, I think the quality of Irish food, we need to emphasise that. We need to keep telling the story, and I think we need to be more optimistic about how we can improve the sustainability credentials of the food that we produce here in Ireland by linking with the farmers and by supporting them in their journey to sustainability, because we need food in order to survive, as Donal has said.
But at the moment, we're killing ourselves.
Currently, food is producing emissions. It is possible, and indeed very much possible, that we can balance those emissions with carbon sequestration. And I was disappointed that only 3% of the audience were counting carbon footprint as being hugely important in their purchasing of food. I think that's going to increase, and I think that's among certain audiences, certainly the youth, that is much greater. But there's room for optimism. There are techniques and innovations that are being made ready at the moment and are starting to be implemented that can make our food production completely sustainable. So we can be and will be carbon neutral by 2050, and we will be halfway there by 2030.
Well, that's certainly something to look forward to, and it's always nice to have a note of optimism. To conclude a panel discussion, thank you so much, all of you, Alice, JP, Donal and Sharon. I really enjoyed it. Thank you to all of you who joined in as well with your poll questions and the questions that you sent in. And I enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you did too. But we're not done yet. And while we're getting our second panel in place for our discussion on the social sustainability of our food system, and that's really about the people and the communities who are central to all of that. And in some cases, it was raised by our first panel already. And it's about what their story is, the connection between food and people and place and how we nurture them all better. I just want to fill you in before we press ahead with that and while we get our panellists in place on the remaining 2 dialogues. Now, a reminder once again, all of the conversations in this series are feeding into the United Nations Food Systems Summit in the autumn that David Nabarro was telling us about earlier. The next dialogue will be on the 4th of May. The theme is promoting an inclusive food system for the future. The keynote speaker on the 4th will be Dr. Colin Sage, and our panels will be looking at changes in consumption and sustainable production being driven by young people, excuse me, and what that means for the future. We'll also have a panel looking at the role of research and development in transforming Irish food production in the coming decade. That's all going to be happening on May the 4th. And our final dialogue in this series is on the 17th of May. And then we're going to be talking about the foreign policy dimension. We have 2 great keynote speakers on the 17th. We'll be joined by Dr. Susanna Moorhead from the OECD and Dr. Jamie Morrison from the Food and Agriculture Organisation. And on the 17th, our panels will be discussing how Ireland can help promote change internationally, and also the key question, how to turn all of this policy into practice. So those are the dates for your diary, the 4th and 17th of May, and we hope that you'll be able to join us again then. Another poll question for you. This is poll 3, which will be feeding into our second panel discussion, which is about to start now. What's the most important objective to you in terms of social sustainability in our food production? Is it the health and safety of farmers? Is it improving farm incomes? Is it ensuring a younger workforce? Improving work-life balance? Promoting gender balance in agriculture? Or strengthening local communities? Please ignore that noise in the background. We are checking out what it is and we'll let you know presently what it is. But for the moment, we'll continue and I'll introduce you to our second panel. So with me here in our virtual studio is Cathal O'Donoghue. He's the Chair of Social and Public Policy at NUI Galway. Kathleen EA was supposed to be here in the studio, but her trawler had a problem and she's been looking for a part all morning. So Kathleen EA, trawler woman from the Rin Gaeltacht and also owner of the fish restaurant Iasc. Thank you, that's the end of that noise, just for you, Kathleen. She's also a former chief executive of the Irish Southeast Fishing Organisation. Also here in Dublin, we're delighted to welcome Iseult Ward. She's co-founder of Food Cloud, which matches leftover food with charities and community groups, avoiding food waste and achieving social good, and who's won many awards for her social entrepreneurship. And we've already had some questions in about that issue of waste. So that's a subject we'll be talking to you about, Iseult. And we're also joined remotely by Brendan Dunford. He's a champion of sustainable farming in the Burren, and he co-founded the Burren Bio Trust with his late wife Anne. He's also advised on the Agri-Food 2030 strategy. And when I was looking at this lineup of guests, and we'll start with you, Brendan, I just thought it's such a strong panel of people who've got such fantastic stories to tell about people, place and food and the production of food and the connection between them all. So tell us your story and what you're bringing to the table from all that experience you've had there in the Burren.
Yeah, thanks, Anya, and greetings from the beautiful Burren. It's a lovely sunny day here. So yeah, I often feel like an imposter at these events because my story is quite local, but I think it has a value because it does connect people, place, food and society. And I suppose it's really relevant because about 20 years ago when we started work here, we were in a very challenging position because I think the word environment was a very dirty word and farmers felt very, I suppose, threatened by SACs and different designations. And since that time, through really good local leadership by the farming community and support from the scientific community, we've managed to turn the threats as they're perceived then into opportunities. And I think today, where I'm sitting in the heart of the Burren, you can see a thriving landscape, a rural community which is still, I guess, struggling because of the decline in rural society, but farmers who are earning a living now, not just from producing great food, but from actually producing.
Oh, have we lost the connection to Brendan there? We'll try and re-establish that, because Brendan does have a great story to tell. Maybe Kathleen, you tell us your story, because we all know for Irish fishing communities, these are tough times. So why you do it and why you believe so passionately in the production, and you do everything. You control every step of your food chain. So tell us your story.
Hi, hi Anya. Look, I was listening to the first panel there, and I find it all very interesting, because what I wanted to say today really, I suppose, is the crossover between heritage, culture and sustainability. I suppose we'd be one of the few industries that hasn't really gained anything much from being a member of the EU, in that our waters are controlled by EU policy. And again, I suppose, look at growing up in a small Gaeltacht ring, we would have been very connected to the sea. My dad and his dad were fishermen. I had 3 brothers fishing, and so did I. So there was 4 of us. I'm the last person with a fishing license of my siblings. All the others have actually bowed out a long time ago, and I'm still there. I would imagine that I may be the last person in my family, unfortunately, to fish. And you know, again, like Brendan was saying, I suppose farming gets a lot of bad press because of the carbon issue, and fishing gets a very bad press because of overfishing. Again, I suppose EU policies have, and there is a lot of overfishing, but I've seen drastic changes, I suppose. And again, it comes into food and how we deal with food, because I grew up in a place where we would have had, my dad fished with an acre of land. So we would have a pig and some hens, and my dad would go to sea and we grew potatoes. All of that has changed now, because EU policy states that we cannot land the fish into our own port. So I, as a child, as I went down to my dad's boat, I can no longer do that because we had to go into government harbours. So that was removed. So we lost that culture. So I suppose talking about culture and where everything comes from, fishing industry is affected by fishing policies in Europe. There is no doubt. Ireland having 4% in its own waters is you know, throws all the sustainability and all the cultural connection and heritage out the window, because it doesn't support us in our heritage. And I come from a Gaeltacht area. Most of the ports around the country, all of them, most of them come from areas. And fishing has devastated those communities, really, not just in Ireland, but in small places like Brittany and Vigo and small places around Europe, because it created big markets. And in creating big markets, it was big companies that took over the fishing industry and left us with very, very little at our doorstep. And I would argue that if we're really interested in sustainability, if we're really interested in culture and heritage, then we do need to bring it back to local. It doesn't make any sense that I cannot catch some of the products that's outside my door, so I cannot catch some of the fish that's outside my door. Yet we give most of the 90% of the quota goes to boats that have to steam from Zeebrugge or Vigo or Gilvanec in France, and they come into Irish waters. They catch their catch, they take it back to Europe, and 90% of what we catch goes out to Europe, and all of it is shipped back in. Now, I think there's a real disconnect as to what happened to fishing, and we get a bad press because of overfishing, as I said, and I think we get that because people don't understand. We didn't make the policies that created for big companies. Do you know what I mean? I'm surviving here. My kids, when they were young, went down to the pier to their dad. A number of years later, they couldn't do that. So I suppose it's difficult. There was a time maybe when we grew up in Ireland where we understood where food came from, because you went out and you picked it up. I think in a very short time, we now have a lot of children that don't actually know what foods, where they come from. And I suppose if you're selling food very cheaply, like carrots for 4 or 5 cents and chicken for €2.99, you have no value on it, because nobody can feed a family on €4 per cent for carrots or €2.99 for chicken. And again, the same thing with fish. When I open my ES restaurant in Dungarvan, I try and speak to people and explain to them It's seasonal. We expect food to be available now at all times of the year. Strawberries all year round, and mackerel all year round, and herring all year round, and cod all year round. And I keep saying to them, we can't do that. It's supposed to be seasonal. It's not supposed to be, like knitting a jumper. You have a jumper all year round. This is supposed to be. I think we need to bring it back to culture. There are seasons in everything. And it's one of the things I try to do in my takeaways, explain to people that we may not have cod every year every time of the year, because it's on a quota, and the quota don't dictate that. So we don't have enough quota, but I can give you something else. So, that's just a fast summary as to what I'm doing,
Thank you. It's a great story. And Brendan, you're back with us. And just to pick up on that point you were making about the way that many farmers in the Byrne who felt, threatened by a lot of the environmental regulation and all of this stuff coming out, how threat has been turned into an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think, apologies for the interruption, I think that's the essence of the story, and that's the challenge we face at the moment with agri-food strategies, because I think a lot of farmers feel threatened. So I suppose here it was great local leadership, and then the scientific community rode in behind, and then farmers created new alliances with the environmental sector. And lo and behold, 20 years later, farmers are receiving a significant proportion of their income for delivering these ecosystem services. So basically producing great food. And we need farmers to produce great food, nutritious food, and I think that's important. But beyond that, they're protecting some of the world's greatest biodiversity. They're sustaining a cultural heritage. They're reenacting traditions that have lasted for thousands of years. So I think pulling everything together, I think really the future is to see farmers as something more than just food producers. We need them to be producers of high quality, nutritious food, but also to sustain traditions and cultures, to sustain landscapes like the Byrne and Connemara and Kerry, those wonderful landscapes, some of which are unfortunately suffering terribly at the moment. And also to create a new relevance in society as something other than what they are. Because I think farmers, to my mind, are amazing people. They're so resilient. They give so much, they have so much to offer. And I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, view them just as food producers. So I think from a time of challenge has come a time, I think, of great opportunity for farmers here in the Byrne. And I don't see why that can't be the case for farmers all across Ireland and all across Europe.
And Isolde, of course, you found an opportunity, because we need to look at food, and if we're going to talk about sustainability, it's not just food production, it's of course all the way to the bits that we're throwing away that we didn't want, or that we had that have gone past their date, or we didn't want too much of. Talk to us about Food Cloud as an opportunity, and maybe as a way of that whole idea of the whole food chain and looking for new opportunities to make our system more sustainable.
Yeah, well, for us it was, first of all, it was understanding the fact that actually by wasting food, we're damaging the environment. So food waste is responsible for a roughly 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. And then when you look at that problem, and at the same time, you know that there are people that can't access enough food, there are amazing community organisations across the country spending their limited resources on purchasing food, and that was really where we saw an opportunity to, on one hand, reduce the environmental impact, and on the other hand, actually create brilliant social benefit by redistributing this food. And the first barriers we faced was that understanding that actually perfectly edible food goes to waste. A lot of people would have assumed food waste, that we're talking about the contents of a compost bin, peels and foods that wouldn't necessarily be edible, but actually often we're talking about perfectly good food that for a wide variety of reasons doesn't end up on supermarket shelves, doesn't end up being sold, and ultimately is destined for waste. So what we've managed to do is create a way to actually connect food businesses with local community organisations across the country.
And when you started doing that, did people think you were nuts, or did they go, oh wow, why did nobody ever think of that before?
There was a lot of people who thought it probably wasn't going to be a feasible solution to do this. But at the same time, you meet a lot of people who interact with food on a daily basis, whether it's food producers, food businesses, community organisations who serve food. And even though they may not have thought it was viable, they also saw a huge opportunity and potential impact out of it. So the first few people, whether it was charities, community groups or businesses that got behind it, they may not have thought that it was necessarily going to succeed, but they did see a huge potential impact from what could be. And I think that's where we got a lot of the initial support and initial momentum behind it, because it was the opportunity that it presented. And, you know, food is so important to us culturally, socially. It connects people, it breaks down barriers, it starts conversations, and whatever service you provide in your community, food can really enhance that. So I think that's where we saw a lot of the engagement and early momentum and willingness really to kind of, I suppose, bet on a solution that could really create a positive impact.
I think they're three amazing personal stories about people and place and food and different aspects of the food change. And this is a good time probably to bring in the result of our Slido poll. The most important objective in terms of you, our audience. What's most important to you in terms of social sustainability? The health and safety of primary producers was 8%. Ensuring a younger workforce was only 2%. Improving work-life balance was 12%. Promoting gender balance, 6%. Strengthening local communities, 45%. And second place, improving primary producer incomes on 26%. What do you make of that, Cathal? Strengthening local communities and improving incomes. Because, you know, very often people can feel, you know, and all the kind of the policies about food that's coming down from the top, that it's, as Brendan was saying, that it can feel threatening. Or if you're in the fishing community, the fact that you are in an enormous market, they have lost out. So these are, you know, harsh facts that can't be wiped away. So what do you think are the priorities going forward in strengthening communities and bringing people with change?
I guess it's probably not surprising. Both of those questions bring it back to individuals' personal family situation and their community where they live. I worked with the Byrne Lowlands Development Company. I live in a similar area to Brendan, and in strengthening the local community there, we had 3 objectives. And first was make the area a nicer place to live, then a nice place to work, and then people would come and visit. And it's all grounded in the better community. And farmers, fishermen, rural dwellers are all part of the same community. So you must, I guess, develop it in a holistic way. The second thing is not to treat people as the same. We hear you in the document there, there's a lot of different issues, a lot of different people. That policy must treat people in different ways. If you think about farming, Teagasc does some research which groups farmers into viable farmers, which is only 1/3 of farmers that make a viable living. And then 1/3 are what they call sustainable. They're non-viable, but they have income from other sources. And then there's 1/3 that are vulnerable. So they all have different needs. The first group, the things we talk about in the rest of the sessions, about technology and so on, they're the things that will affect the incomes of the viable mostly. The sustainable, the people who are working off farm, then the solutions for them are the same solutions as for other rural dwellers, and that's about the government policy around rural futures, creating more and better jobs, giving people the skills to take advantage of jobs. It's the same whether it be rural people or farmers. And then lastly, the vulnerable. It's about how do we get them jobs? Or in many cases, they're older workers. How do we smooth the transition from working to retirement?
Because there are a lot of farmers who feel, you know, suddenly in the 21st century, there's people coming along with rules and regulations and telling me the way I always farmed or the way I always lived my, you know, as Kathleen was saying, people who can't go down and, you know, to see the trawlers coming in and land the fish because there's new rules and regulations around all of that. And people can feel, you're squeezing us out. So how do you again, not have a situation where because of good change in making our food systems more sustainable, people feel left behind? That's the key question.
There's a lot of things there. I think there's a lot we want from the food sector. We want good food. We want it to be safe. We want to minimise the impact on the environment. And so almost by necessity, we need to regulate it and we need to incentivise it. But I think sometimes something that we forget, and I think maybe we've seen it in COVID, that often it's about hearts and minds. Most people want to do the right thing. It's not all about regulation. It's not all about financial incentives. If you can bring people with you and convince you, most people will actually try to do their best. If there's a cost to them, you may want to think about a way of compensating them. But by and large, if you can make it easier for people to do things, then I think people will do them.
And find ways that they'll find an opportunity. It is
Exactly.
all about finding new opportunities. Kathleen, there's a question here. Tom Arnold said in Summit 1, actions must be bottom up. So given the pressure your community is under, which you described so eloquently there, and, you know, those big pressures of, you know, the EU and the rules and quotas, they're not going to go away. How can local communities be supported in developing bottom-up solutions and finding a more sustainable future for themselves within that very big market?
Well, I suppose, Anya, these are words I would have heard for the last 20 years, bottom-up solutions and stakeholders having a lot of say in where we're going. But, you know, I suppose, and then this, and again, going back to sustainability, it hasn't happened. You know, there are, and I understand that, and that policies have to be made, and that we are better off in the EU. I'm not anti-EU, but it's one of the places that the EU has failed, I think, is in fisheries. And I think it's not just for Ireland. I think it's failing fisheries to protect our stocks. I think it's failing in coastal communities. So we as a little island, and we are a little island, and we are surrounded by water. So we're islanders, and we have a great affinity with the sea, and we love the sea, and it makes us the people we are, which is very strong, resilient people as a nation. And we can see that we bounce back all the time. I suppose, like, we need to really, when policies are made, and I can understand, and I've been there in Brussels, and they make a policy and it's to do with minding a fish stock or something, but nobody looks at what effect this is actually having on the families. Do you know, what effect is it having on local areas? If a policy comes in that says we need only, if you're catching monk over a certain quota, then you can only land in 4 ports around the country. What does that affect you? That may, in some small way, and it'll only be a small way, save stocks. But what big way does it affect the communities? How does it take it away from the actual family-run farming, the family-run fishing boat? I fear for, especially with these cuts now with the Brexit deal, because we have been part of the UK for 800 years, so we fished in the same waters forever. This is the first real break from the island of the UK that we've had. So we're no longer fishing in their waters without a permit, and that may not be for very long. I suppose, how do you get, again, going back to that, when policies are made, it's very important that you look at the effect that policy will have on the stocks, but what effect will that policy have on the communities? And how can you do both? How can we have a sustainability in food without sustaining the people? I mean, I would look at myself as being an indigenous fishery person, as in the Kellys in Helvick and the Powers in Dunmore East and the DCs in Ewing and Hall and all those people around the coast that have been part of fishing communities for hundreds of years. How do we and our lifestyle get protected? This is a huge, big question for us, because I'm very proud of my heritage and the sea and my connection with it, right back to my dad and his grandfather. That's under threat now, and it's not necessarily done deliberately, but it's done because there's a disconnect with what effect every policy that's made in Europe, a long way away from Onraing in the Gaeltacht here, what effect that really will have on this community here. And how do we bring that back? So how do we have sustainability? How do we have our culture? And how do we keep that? And yet, you know, how do we change it now? We need to change it. We need to make sure that if you're in the Ardmore Islands off Donegal, that you've access to fish a bit of mackerel. And you know, if you're here, that we can catch what's closest to us, carbon footprint. That you're not expecting boats to come from halfway around the world. Japanese boats fishing tuna 200 miles off the Irish coast. Why?
You described those big questions so eloquently. I wish I had answers for you, but I think it's a really important point, the impact on small fishing communities. Here's a quick question for you before I go to that question of the disconnect back to Brendan. Do we do enough to encourage consumers to cook fish at home? Quickly.
No, we don't. I feel now when I opened the restaurant, there was I serve food, and the amount of young people that come and eat, and I think that's because we travel more now, so we're more used to food abroad. But I would be surprised that I would get tables when we weren't, when lockdown wasn't there, that of 8 or 9 or 10 young people, 12, sitting around together on a Saturday night, all willing to eat fish, because I don't do any meat, I do all fish. But I think we are I'm surprised. I think we eat an awful lot more than what I would have expected us to do. I think we're taking it out more than we're cooking it enough at home. But I think it's changing though. And I think places like Dungarvan and Kinsale and those alongside the sea there's a lot of work going into fish and fishing communities. And because we're now buying more local, I think that will make a difference as well.
I was sick once for a very long time, and it's when I finally learned how to cook fish by watching cookery programs, and in the end I got a thermometer and everything. And now the kids would give out to me and say, "You've overcooked the fish, Mum," which would be like a scandal. I learned not to do that at last. Brendan, I do think that's a really important point that Kathleen raised there about, policies which can, be, because you're trying to, protect fishing stocks and all the rest, and then there's quotas, and then so that there can be a disconnect between a policy that's happening for one reason, within the whole kind of food policy area, but it has an impact on people that's not, and communities that's not taken into account. And this is something I suspect you would argue is where we need to join the dots.
Absolutely, I think it's a very important point. I just come back to something Carl said there as well. I think, for farmers, it's not just about the money, but farming is a business, and, they have to be rewarded for what they deliver. And I think this is where, at the moment we're negotiating CAP, and the CAP strategic plan has to reward and acknowledge and support farmers who want to farm for biodiversity or carbon, etc., etc. But I think really important to farmers' set of values is the freedom to farm. And I think a lot of farmers feel that they're being told what to do now a lot. They've been victimized. They've lost control over the prices that they sell to the factories at or to the co-ops at. And that's a very, very disempowering feeling for farmers. And I think it's very upsetting, I guess, for farmers that they've been cut out of the decision-making process, because for them, one of the big values of being a farmer is the freedom to get up in the morning and to decide what you want to do and how you want to do it. And I think they feel they're losing that now for all sorts of reasons, be it policy, or be it the environmental movement, or be it the vegan movement and so on. So I think it's important, if we're wanting to get farmers on board, and I think that's the key challenge here, Anya, is to get farmers on board with the huge biodiversity and climate and food and nutrition crisis that we have in Ireland and in the world at the moment. And if we want to get them on board, we have to speak to those values of freedom, giving them more freedom to farm, but incentivizing them to farm in the way that society needs them to farm, and also providing with the proper support. So here in the Byrne, I suppose, restoring that connection with the place has been a huge part of our work, and it really underpins whatever success we've enjoyed. So for instance, we have a big festival every year celebrating the old tradition of winter grazing, which is wonderful because farmers get to show off their traditions and society gets to take part in it. We have walks every month, and those walks for the public are usually led by a farmer, and the empowerment of that experience of showing people your farm and being thanked for what you do is huge, and we've lost that connection. Farmers markets, another thing. Every winter, for instance, we have a talk in a local hall. Carl has presented for us a few times, where farmers can come in and have a cup of tea and a chat and learn a little bit more about their area. We have schools programs and so on, and it's about restoring the connection with the place and enabling the whole history and heritage of management to carry on in those places rather than making it too strict or regimental. And I think it's all about enabling freedom while incentivizing the right outcomes.
Oh gosh, I wish I was there now and I could go and do some of those walks. But anyhow, we'll have to wait a little while longer for all of that. Just a quick one that's come in for you, Isolde. Does Food Cloud have a healthy food policy? And if not, are there any plans to implement one in the future? Now that's interesting, isn't it? That's another challenge on top of what you're already doing. Is that something you already take on board?
We don't have an overall policy, but we do have an objective, for example, to increase the number of growers and primary producers that we're working with, so that we can increase the amount of fresh fruit and vegetables that we distribute out to community organisations. One of the challenges is that we work with such a wide variety of organisations who serve people with a very wide variety of needs. So we really ask them, to have the policy. So, for example, a nursery generally is going to have a no sugar policy, and therefore they will not take any sugary foods that are provided through our services. But on the other hand, you might have a community centre, a daycare centre that wants to celebrate a birthday or have an occasion or people coming together, and it's very difficult for us.
Don't tell Donald O'Shea, but you want a great big sugary cake with lots of cream.
But you know, it's very difficult for us to dictate on their behalf when they're the ones in the local community, they're the ones meeting the needs of the people in the community, and we're not going to dictate for them necessarily exactly what they should and should not, especially when, you know, most of us will enjoy a bar of chocolate every once in a while. So I think there has to be a bit of flexibility there, and you know, a lot of what we've seen is the emphasis on strengthening local communities. Local communities comprise of local organisations. They're the ones that know, they're the ones that will dictate it. But we do have an objective to increase fresh fruit and vegetables that we are distributing, and we know that there is a lot of food waste at a farm level, and we know there's a big opportunity to increase the amount of food that can be distributed from a farm to ensure that more people have access to fresh fruit and vegetables.
That's really interesting. Cathal, going back to that question of the freedom to farm, because really, you know, in these dialogues at the UN summit, in the agri-food strategy, there's a huge amount of ambition. You know, we're trying to do an awful lot. You know, we're trying to produce better food for more people that will be affordable, that will have far less impact on the environment. And we're trying to make sure that people and communities, they're all stakeholders in this huge process of change. But that point Brendan was making about the freedom to farm, and that how we stop maybe the ambition of the agenda, if you like, being daunting for some sectors and possibly even off-putting.
I guess the word ambition is the dominant thing there. We kind of need to be ambitious because the goals are challenging. We have to feed the world. There's going to be a lot more people, so the sector needs to do that. We also need to do it more sustainably with a lower footprint. And if you look at globally at the agri-food sector, it has actually stepped up to the mark over the last 50 years. It has fed more people, but I guess in a less environmentally sustainable way. I guess one of the lessons about Irish agriculture is that the sector is actually quite sustainable. If you look at the carbon footprint per milk in particular, it's amongst the lowest. So it's good that Ireland produces.
And is carbon sequestration a huge opportunity for us in all of this?
I think it's in terms of marketing what we do, because we have a lower footprint and we have an opportunity in terms of afforestation, if we could do it, to sequester carbon. I did a back of the envelope calculation coming up here that if we had met our forestry planting targets since 2014, we would have covered more than the emissions that we've created in the expansion of dairy. So
really?
Yeah. Really, so it's about four hectare forest sequesters carbon over life cycle, but four cows.
So again, you know, the spectre of, you know, great big culls of the national herd are coming because we, you know, biogenic methane has become a baddie and all the rest. You know, you can have evolutionary change plus positive change could get you the same result.
If we went back to the 80s and 90s, dairy farmers were the ones who were planting amongst the most forestry because they were buying land to buy quota, and they were planting, and they might buy the land up the country, they put forestry on it, and they would use the quota to have milk down in Cork and Kilkenny and Waterford. So they actually did it before. Teagasc have this proposal about offsetting. So if you want to expand, you buy the emission rights from either people who want to plant forestry or plant it yourself, or maybe working with the beef herd, because there's more income from dairy than from beef, so that you could come to some relationship maybe with a beef farmer that if they reared your replacement animals, that you could produce milk animals and they would produce your replacements. You have less overall animals, less emissions, and higher income. So there are solutions. The thing is, we often know what to do, but the question is how to do it and how to get the right levers. Some of them are things like schemes like Brendan in the Byrne programme. They pay farmers for results. When they deliver improved biodiversity, they get paid more. I think that was a really great experiment that could be applied elsewhere in other environmental goals. Then there is the hearts and minds. training, communicating.
That's where I love the idea of those winter talks and you know, the community coming together with a cup of tea, because it's not always the big browbeating kind of, the big message. Sometimes it's as much as that, the chat from your neighbour, and that's actually what's going to...
Oh, it's fantastic. I've as friends that I've been there, the farmers feel so proud of what they've done. I mean, they have transformed something that was a unique habitat that was worsening, and because what they have done and working with people like Brendan, they've actually seen the transformation locally. It's a fantastic story. I know, and we all love, don't we, when it comes up on our phones about the winterage, and it's just one of the, even for urban dwellers like us, who've been stuck within our 5 kilometres. Now, we've another poll for you, another Slido poll, which will bring you the results up before the end of this discussion. So, which of these is the most important to enable the social sustainability of farming? Is it diversification? Is it off-farm income? Succession planning? Education, agricultural knowledge and innovation systems? So what do you think? Brendan, what can local communities learn from the example provided by the Byrne in changing how they think about your sustainability? That's a question that's come in. So what lessons can other areas of the country, other communities take from what's happened there?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question, and I'm glad to say that through the Department of Ag, other communities have adopted the principles that we've applied here for the purpose of the hen harrier, the freshwater pearl mussel, in landscapes like Connemara and in Donegal and places like that through this EIP program. And I think the lessons for me are really important, that we've got to value the farmer. I've always seen the farmer as a huge resource, and the challenge we've been focused on for 20 years is how do we mobilize that resource? And the lessons we've learned from dealing face-to-face with farmers and chatting to them every day is it's about the pocket, the head and the heart. It has to make financial sense. If you want farmers to farm for carbon or biodiversity, it has to make financial sense. But you only pay a farmer when he delivers. Secondly, the heads, I think sharing the ideas and the knowledge. And I think we have a great advisory system in Ireland through Teagasc and private planners. But peer-to-peer learning, I think, is a huge thing. Farmers telling other farmers how they've done it. We have a lovely little project called Farming for Nature now, where we have ambassadors right across Ireland who share their stories and their knowledge with other farmers. And it's such a powerful concept, farmers teaching each other and sharing the knowledge about how to do things. And the third thing we've learned in the Byrne is it's all about the heart. You got to restore that connection with the place. We've got to tell farmers, you're doing a great job, we need you, but when you do the right type of farming. If you're doing the wrong type of farming, you're undermining our environmental credentials and you're making it more difficult for us to market the food. But my message to farmers is that, it's one of, respect. We need you on side. We're prepared to support you and reward you and acknowledge you. And I think that's the real fundamental lesson on it that we've learned in the Byrne over the last 20 years. Farmers are a resource and we can mobilise that resource. And right now, we desperately need to.
Points well made. Carl, there's a really good question has come in. We may have a relatively low carbon footprint, as you were saying. A lot of what we have is actually quite sustainable, just a bit more imaginative thinking, and we could easily get there. But the fact that we export 90% of our dairy and beef, how does that sit with the wisdom of local equals good?
Of local? Equals
good.
I think there's two sides to that. I mean, the world needs to be fed. We can produce food that is relatively more sustainable than some other parts. If it's not produced by us, then it might be produced in the Amazon basin or something. So I think that's important. Local equals good. I think people like to know more about their food. They like to, it's good for tourism to build knowledge about local provenance and stories and strengthen and have more pride in local food. I think there's a place for both. I think if we were only feeding for local, then we wouldn't have as many farmers, and we don't need as much food. We've always our whole existence, going back to the Middle Ages, has been exporting food. So I think that is a central part of what we do, and I think there is a place for both. I think perhaps after joining the EC, we probably focused on the export a bit too much and on the commodity exports. But I think, and we've seen, particularly over the last 10, 15 years, the growth in arts and foods and all the spin out local food products, that side is growing and growing more and more. So I think there is room for the two.
All right. does Ireland have a role to play in promoting sustainable communities abroad? Kathleen, maybe you take this, as well as at home, through a food systems approach, because I was interested the way that you referenced not just your own community there, but other small fishing communities around Europe, and you know there's a common story to tell there.
Yeah, I suppose, Anya, you know, I just see from going abroad. I've been to Portugal a few years ago, and the first thing we would do when we go to Spain, Portugal, France is we'd go to the fishing areas and go down and taste their seafood and see their boats. And we went to Portugal and they had a nice fleet. And I went in saying, gosh, I'm very impressed. They have a nice fleet of trawlers. And I was told they're not Portuguese. They were all Spanish. The Portuguese fleet was completely wiped out and taken over by Spain. We see the same thing. The EU had a big fight for fisheries and how important it was to them. Most of the white fish trawlers in the UK have Spanish flags. So I don't think Boris understands much about his fishing industry, to be honest with you, because I don't think he realises that. Spain have a huge fleet in our waters as well, and they are buying up. So I suppose my fear and my holding on to my one boat is that where Europe, because it's economically driven, has always, you know, I suppose we saw the decline in small shops and small farming and small fishermen, and that's just something that happened after we joined the EU, and you know, money went into other things like roads and all of that. But I suppose now, because we are in a world where we're supposed to be looking at the carbon footprint, and we're supposed to be looking at sustainability and sustaining people's culture and understanding more about it, Europe needs to have a serious look. They have lost the UK. They need to have a serious look at other coastal unit or other countries around Europe and other communities, and not let the same thing happen as happened to the UK. It did happen in France, and it did happen in Portugal, it did happen in other small areas that you know, those closest to the source just aren't simply allowed get the majority of the product. And I think if we're serious about communities, then we need to relook at that. We need to know, why is so much of the quota in Irish waters going to big companies in Spain, where we are not benefiting from it?
Just interesting, the results of our Slido poll. Which of these is the most important to you, our audience? To enable the social sustainability of farming. So off-farm income, 6% thought that was the most important. 7% thought succession planning. 10% education. Interesting, given how important we've been saying in this discussion it is. 23% diversification, but a whopping 54% said agricultural knowledge and innovation systems. But in a way, that brings you back to the education, doesn't it? And the way that all happens. Carl, maybe your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the thing is, if you want to change people's behaviour, you need to look at yourself and change the behaviour of people who set the incentives. And so that is the system. That kind of brings it back to the theme, that the whole system needs to think about changing, because these are complex problems. I'm surprised, actually, that is the number one, but it's very good from the perspective of what the dialogues are trying to achieve, to think in a systems perspective.
And it is that, I heard somebody say, or I was listening to some radio programme, but imagination is much more important than knowledge. Apparently Einstein had said that, because it's the imagination to see what's possible, as opposed to just knowing everything there is to know about what's happened up to now. We've got to imagine new ways of doing the future. Isn't that right, Iseult?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think we'd be here, Food Cloud would be here today if that wasn't true, because if I knew everything about the food system and the food industry, I might have seen too many barriers, and we as an organisation mightn't have been able to start because of it. But it was actually our imagination and the imagination, I think, of many others that have supported us and helped us grow along the way, that actually has helped us grow and connect so many food businesses and community organisations nationally. So, no, I think it's imagination is definitely something incredibly valuable to us today.
That's a really important point, and I think a good one to conclude on. You've been an absolutely fascinating panel. It's been my pleasure to talk to you all. Iseult, Cathal, Brendan and Kathleen, thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our panellists and speakers today. To conclude our second dialogue, which I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have, here's the chairperson for today's session, Dr. Pamela Byrne.
Thank you very much, Anya. And I would like to thank Dr. David Nabarro and all of our panellists and all of you who put questions to the panel. A particular word of thanks to Anya for her expertise in moderating the panels. What a fantastic discussion we've had today. So many views, perspectives and ideas about how we can make this transition to a sustainable food system within which we need to recognise people, place and food. Safe and trustworthy food for everyone is the vision of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, and I would take a guess and say that is what consumers, all of you and all of those that consume Irish food in 180 markets across the world want and rightfully expect. And I would add, we are all entitled to. The Draft Agri-Food Strategy 2030 commits to providing food that is safe, nutritious and appealing, trusted and valued at home and abroad. As the CEO of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, I am very encouraged to see this commitment. Sustainable consumption of food is a key element of the transition to a sustainable food system, and it is also important and it plays an important role in supporting better health outcomes for society, better outcomes for our environment and better outcomes for our economy. And today's panel discussions have highlighted some of the challenges and opportunities to ensure that we can achieve those outcomes in an inclusive way. However, it is important for us to make sure that this is a just transition and is inclusive. We heard from Caithlín Hay that the challenges of the fishing sector need to be recognised in EU policies and support our connection to the sea and to the land, especially in rural areas. We need to bring it back to local. We also need to understand where our food comes from. Threats have been turned into opportunities, as we heard from great local leadership, new alliances, transfer of knowledge, producing nutritious food, and at the same time we can protect biodiversity. It is possible, according to Brendan Dunford. Farmers are more than just producers. They sustain landscapes. It is a time of great opportunity across Ireland and Europe. The Food Safety Authority supports the ambitions of the strategy and looks forward to working with our partners as this roadmap is implemented. We've heard many facts today from our panellists. We've also heard from you that nutrition is one of the most important considerations when buying food. As Professor Stanton said, we need to communicate better about the nutritional aspects of food. Collectively, we consume more calories than we need to be healthy. Ireland's rate of obesity and overweight is one of the highest in Europe, with approximately 60% of the adult population being overweight or obese. Professor O'Shea outlined the importance of routine in monitoring weight and height during early life health checks, allowing doctors to identify issues early on in life. The addition of more than 100 dietitians will be important in understanding and dealing with the problem. Eat less, move more is not the treatment for obesity. This is the prevention message. More aggressive education is key. As we've heard, at the same time, there are people in our society that go hungry, that eat cheap calories to survive but are not nourished. These people are undernourished and they can suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, as we heard from Professor Stanton. And this has increased during COVID-19, as we heard from Dr. Nabarro. COVID has affected many different aspects of food, but we can be stronger and work towards more sustainable and equitable food systems in the future. The FSAI has worked across government and other stakeholders in the delivery of the Healthy Ireland strategy for the last number of years and provided scientific recommendations to support the development of food-based dietary guidelines for adults, 1 to 5-year-olds, and just last week for older people. Guidelines which can help us all make healthy choices in our diet, and if we just stuck to these guidelines, they ensure that we consume a balanced diet containing all of the nutrients, vitamins and minerals we need to be healthy. But we need to talk about the cultural aspects of food also. And we heard from you that 81% of you want advice on how to eat more healthily. And this is something I will, in the Food Safety Authority, will consider along with colleagues in Healthy Ireland. We heard from Sharon Buckley that consumers are more interested in healthy food and healthy diets, and there's been a dramatic shift seen over the first wave of COVID, when consumers have really valued getting back to basics, cooking from scratch, sourcing locally, although this has shifted more recently to people wanting more diverse choices, and retailers have a role in encouraging more balanced and healthy diets. JP McMahon stressed the importance of community in our food system, a real food system that is dependent on people. He also stressed the importance of education, especially of our young people. Chefs have a role in educating people how to cook, to respect ingredients, to recognising the value of those ingredients, and we need to avoid reducing food to just its nutritional value. COVID-19 has taught us a lot about what we value. We need to take this forward and maintain our connection with the land. The Food Safety Authority is responsible for checking food products to ensure they contain only approved ingredients and at safe levels. We cannot regulate what individual consumers do in their own homes. We can only advise and support people to change. We need real change. Food and drink consumption is the biggest driver of diseases we suffer from, according to Professor Donal O'Shea. We need to reach to where the problem is greatest, and this is in the less well-off parts of our society. Key will be around marketing and promotion of high-fat, high-salt, high-sugar foods. Building food into the curriculum in schools could be transformative. But the authority has worked with the food industry in Ireland over many years to reduce the levels of salt in food products, and this has led to significant reductions. But yet the level of salt in population is higher than the recommended 6 grams per day. Some say this is due to individual behaviours of adding salt at the table. The industry has been reformulating its products over the last number of years to reduce sugar and fat, and there have been some reductions seen, but more needs to be done. This is a key part of Ireland's obesity policy and action plan, and I think it will be important to consider all of the points raised today in the context of that plan in the future, and to progress the cross-governmental recommendation in the draft Agri-Food Strategy 2030 for the establishment of a high-level implementation group co-chaired by the Departments of Health and Agriculture, Food and the Marine. We waste food equivalent to 400,000 small cars every year. 50% of salads that we buy, we throw out. We dispose of 25% of the fruit and veg we buy, and yet we don't consume the recommended 5 to 7 portions of fruit and veg every year that are recommended in the healthy eating guidelines. 20% of the bread we purchase, we throw out. 10% of the meat and fish we buy, we throw out. Significant sources of protein and healthy fatty acids is dumped, and 10% of the dairy products we buy, we throw down the sink. We are really throwing away our hard-earned cash. Iseult Ward from Food Cloud shared the importance of creating social benefit from food waste. Food waste is responsible for 8% of greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time, people can't access enough food. Food Cloud has created a way to connect food businesses and organisations across the country that redistribute food. Yet we have seen great innovations over the last number of years in finding ways to reduce food waste, create added value from food that is deemed out of spec but perfectly safe, and ensuring that we distribute safe and nutritious food to those in need. Understanding consumer behaviour will be important in successfully transitioning to sustainable food consumption patterns. New science and evidence will be required to assess the safety of new alternative diets and also the sustainability of those diets. Research indicates that what might appear to be a sustainable diet is not, and may also have an impact on health. I look forward to next week's dialogue exploring research and innovation needs. We heard from you that strengthening communities and increasing income for farmers are important aspects of a sustainable food system in the future. We heard from Professor Cathal O'Donoghue that policy must understand and recognise the diversity of people and the communities they are trying to support and protect. We want a lot from the food sector: safety, quality and the protection of the environment, but we need to bring people along with us on this journey. Kathleen Hay also stressed the importance of policy for local communities. How do we retain our culture in sustainable food systems? The importance of connected and coherent policies and the impact they have on local communities will be important, as we heard from Brendan Dunford. But any food system, local or global, or a mix of both, will not be sustainable if it is not safe. To suggest that our current system is safe enough would be to ignore the existence of significant burden of foodborne disease and the health outcomes around chemicals in food, for example, endocrine disruptors and nanoparticles. As we transition to a sustainable food system, it is not good enough just to maintain the current levels of safety and integrity. We need to improve the levels of safety and integrity of the food chain and increase consumer confidence. With climate change will come natural challenges to the safety of the food system. As we become more connected to the world and technologically advanced, threats will increase to the integrity of the food chain. Changes to the food chain to make it more sustainable will inevitably bring with it inadvertent risks to food safety, which we need to anticipate during research and avoid during adoption. We cannot afford to stand still and expect the status quo to prevail. We need to be proactive at identifying these emerging risks and threats. We need to utilise technology to protect consumer health and interests, and most importantly, we need to invest in the transition to sustainable food systems. We need to equally invest in improving the safety and integrity of the food chain. Sustainability, food safety and food integrity are implicitly interlinked, and a sole focus on one aspect will inevitably threaten consumers' health and interests and undermine Ireland's reputation in the global food trade. Ensuring the availability and affordability of nutritious food will be a key component of more sustainable diets, and ensuring this food is produced in a sustainable way will be important. But what will really demonstrate leadership internationally will be the country that can provide a food system that delivers socially, environmentally, and economically for its people through coherent policies, strong implementation of those policies with the ability to evaluate, monitor and course correct those policies to adapt to changes globally, and policies that are based on science and evidence. There is now a unique opportunity for Ireland to build our strengths collectively, and through working together, these dialogues provide an opportunity for change. In the words of Dr. Agnes Kalibata, UN Special Envoy for the UN Food Systems Summit, if we can't have courageous conversations about what needs to change and how we need to work together, then we won't be able to get very far. We need each of us to determine the food system we want for our future and act on it to make it a reality. As Dr. Nabarro said, let's raise our level of ambition, focus on solutions, and mobilise all stakeholders around this important conversation. I fully believe, and I hope you do too, that we have the ability in Ireland to work together to become a coalition and demonstrate leadership in this important national and global dialogue around the food system we want and need for the future. Please join us in the next two dialogues, which provide another unique opportunity to contribute your voice to this really important conversation, where we will look at how we build a more inclusive food system for the future and the role of research and innovation in food systems transformation, and how we will address the challenge of aligning domestic and foreign policy towards sustainable food systems. Register now for the remaining dialogues at www.gov.ie/food systems. I would like to close by saying thank you very much to the RDS for hosting today's events, and thank you all for your participation. A lot of people have worked really hard to put these dialogues together, including colleagues from the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, particularly Sinead McPhillips and Harry O'Crowley. I want to say thank you to you all before I leave you. It has been a wonderful conversation today, and I really want to say thank you for your contribution and your participating. Keep talking. This is an important conversation for us to have.